It's been more than 30 years, and where I was ministering in rural New Brunswick, Canada, in a small church in Havelock, New Brunswick. And I was working with the pastor who was a DTS grad, and Kenyan-born, East Indian, Sudesh was his name, but he went by Peter in the community there. And it was on the weekend, late at night, and we were enjoying some masala tea. And I was really overwhelmed. I don't remember the details of the situation that I was wrestling through at the church, but I was overwhelmed with it. And I was telling Peter about it. And I was like, this is like a huge problem. I don't know how to navigate this and what to do with it. And he paused me. He said, Scott, you've got to shift your perspective. This isn't just a problem. This is a challenge. It's a big challenge. But it's something that you can overcome and that you can work through. It's not a problem. It's a challenge. And it was in that moment that I didn't realize it at the time, but Peter was teaching me about the lesson of resilience and how important it is to reframe hardship, not as some kind of an obstacle, but as an opportunity for God to deepen my faith and to refine my character and help me to go to a new level of impact of ministry in the church. And I want to talk about that. I want to unpack that, and especially from James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, where he also wants us to build this kind of a reframing of hardship as opportunity through a mindset shift. James, the half-brother of Jesus, in a spirit of humility, teaches us this important truth in James 1, 2, and 3, when he says, "My brothers and sisters, consider it nothing but joy when you fall into all sorts of trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance." In other words, what James is saying is that every trial, every setback, every difficulty, every challenge, every obstacle is God's opportunity to deepen your faith and to refine your character. And this is all for his good in you and his glorious purposes that he's accomplishing through you. As leaders, we can experience resilience as we navigate hardship through this kind of mindset shift, that every obstacle is God's opportunity to deepen our faith and to refine our character. Maybe you've heard the story of the father who had two sons. One was an extreme pessimist, and the other son was an extreme optimist. And the father wanted it to help them to grow to be a little bit more balanced. And so for the pessimist son, he wanted him to be a little more positive. And for the optimist son, he wanted him to learn to be a little bit more realistic. So he prepared a room for his pessimist son, and it was a room full of his favorite toys. And he thought, if I put my son in the room with his favorite toys, he'll enjoy it so much that will help him to be a little bit more positive. And then the father thought, for the optimist son, let me go to the shed and I'll get some horse manure, and I'll put a pile of horse manure in there for him and have him spend the afternoon in there. And hopefully that will temper a little bit his extreme optimism. And so the father walks each of his sons to their rooms. And later that afternoon, he goes in to check on them. First, he checks on his pessimist son in the room with all the toys. And he goes in, and to his surprise, his son is weeping. And the dad asks him, "Son, what's wrong?" Dad, these are all my favorite toys, and I love them so much, but I'm afraid I might break them." The father sighed and thought, I better check on my other son. And so he went and checked on his optimist son, who was back in the back shed. in the pile of manure. And he opens the door to the shed, and to his surprise, he can't see his son. In fact, his son is in the middle of the manure pile digging manure. And the dad says, "Son, what in the world are you doing?" And the son sticks his head up, grinning ear to ear, smiling. And the dad says, "Son, are you okay? What's going on?" He goes, Dad, with all this manure in here, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere." Friends, if we want to become resilient, if we want to be able to bounce back from adversity and to learn from it and to grow stronger through it, we've got to learn to reframe hardship as opportunity. And again, what James is saying is that every trial, every pile of manure, every setback, every difficulty, every challenge, every obstacle is God's opportunity to deepen your faith and refine your character. And James teaches us three things I want to emphasize to this end. First, life is filled with all kinds of trials. So get ready. All of us have been in a hardship in the past, but some of us may be entering one right now in the present. And if not now in the present, we can be guaranteed that there will be hardship around the corner. And the kind of hardship that you and I will face will be everything from annoying to heartbreaking. It moves across the spectrum of our life, from our personal life and walk with the Lord to the ministries that we lead and the organizations that we manage, to hardship and crises at a national level and at a global level, from micro trials to macro trials. Some time ago, I was teaching a men's Bible study on James chapter 1, and I kind of joked with those that were present. I said, "Hello, my name is Scott Barfoot, and my middle initial could be H for Scott Hardship Barfoot." Because probably like you, I've been through a lot of hardship. And I started going through a whole litany of the kinds of hardship that I went through, from annoying to heartbreaking. In fact, I still remember sharing with them about our time in Washington, D.C. during 9/11, living just miles from the Pentagon. And then shortly after that, we had the anthrax scares, where someone was mailing this poisonous substance of anthrax. And then to top things off, in our neighborhood, 6 people were killed by a sniper. I remember so nervous and anxious and traumatized by that. At the gas station, I would not stand still. I would keep moving around because there was a person that had been killed there. I think of the time more recently when 2 of my younger sisters both developed aggressive forms of cancer, one after the other, with one graduating to heaven and the other one battling through this terrible disease. I think of the time my wife Debbie was in a car accident, only to find out that the other driver didn't have a driver's license and yet was suing her for several $1,000,000. I think back of those years when our oldest son was born. And when he was born, he couldn't open his eyes. And by the time he was 3 months old, he had the first surgery of several surgeries. Friends, I know you have your problems and your challenges, and you could walk through your litany of hardship. But one of the things that you and I need to learn in our journey to resilience is to reframe hardship, to reframe it as opportunity, because we are going to face all kinds of trials. And this is what makes, James' book such a great book to read, because it talks about practical wisdom for living. And that's what we have to pray for, that God gives us wisdom to know how to respond to these trials in a way that honors him and moves us forward with a resilience and a dependence and a resilient faith. You know, we tend to respond to trials in one of three ways. We may try to avoid it. We may try to minimize it. Or sometimes we worship our problems, right? We magnify it so much that we just worship it. But what James is trying to do is to help us harness this hardship, to see adversity not as an obstacle to growth, but as an opportunity for growth. And of course, we need God's wisdom to rightly respond to each and every trial that we face. And these trials are so beneficial because they help us to become whole and holy and congruent in a way that adversity and suffering, and if we didn't experience that, we wouldn't reach that level of maturity in our faith and our walk with the Lord. And I love James because later he talks about how God gives us wisdom generously if we just ask him. And so what we learn from James is that life is filled with all kinds of trials, and that how we respond to these trials is the key to God-honoring resilience. And we've got to ask God for wisdom to respond rightly to these trials. And what's amazing is that God is using the hardship that you and I are going through even today to grow us stronger, to grow us wiser, and more impactful. You can read about it more in my book, Resilience Rising, but there was this incredible automotive engineer breakthrough that we have to understand when it comes to this mindset shift in resilience. When we think traditionally about a car's braking mechanism, the engineers had one goal. When the driver presses the brake, how can we dissipate the heat and friction from that brake so it doesn't melt the wheel? That was it. They just wanted to minimize it, to dissipate it, to make it disappear, to make all that kinetic energy go away. But then in the last decade or so, in the development of electric vehicles, the engineers had a breakthrough that gave us a clue to this mindset shift. They said, wait a second. Yeah, it's a lot of heat. Yeah, it's a lot of stress. Yeah, it's a lot of friction. But why are we wasting it? What if we could take all the kinetic energy from that heat and friction, and if there's a way to convert it in a way that it would actually recharge the battery of the vehicle? You may notice that in your EV, that when you press the brake, you can see that it's charging your battery as you're driving. Friends, this is the mindset shift that I think James is talking about. That every obstacle, all the heat, all the pressure, all the friction, all the stress, in a spirit of humility and in the wisdom of God, he can work through that to help us recycle that in a way that makes us stronger, better, wiser, more effective in the place that he's called us to. Friends, our life is full of trials and hardship. That's not going to change. We live in a broken and fallen world. That's just the reality. Suffering is an everyday reality that we will face. But if we ask God, he can give us his wisdom to know how to harness all that suffering, all that adversity, all that stress, and to recycle it in a way that will propel us forward, that will recharge our battery, and that will help us to have a new breakthrough in the very ministry that God's called us to. This is something I'm learning and relearning, my friends. We can consider our suffering with all joy, and we can lean into it because it's there the power of the gospel shines through to minister to one another, to not just see suffering as a big problem to try to minimize or to avoid or to magnify. Friends, we have to learn and relearn to reframe hardship as opportunity. Every obstacle is God's opportunity to deepen your faith and refine your character. It's not a problem you're facing. It's a challenge, and in it is every opportunity for God to shine through and for you to be better and stronger through it. Can I get an amen and a hallelujah?